We're glad to be joined here today by Dan Wright. Dan is a academy coach at the English Premier League's Southampton Football Club. He holds a UEFA A coaching license and an FA Advanced Youth Award and has extensive coaching experience working in high-performance environments in the UK and Africa. Dan's also the technical advisor of the Player Development Project, an outstanding resource for coaches in any sport, where he contributes via blogs, their magazine, and Q&A sessions. Especially during the past few months. On a personal note, his latest book, 100 Small-Sided Games, has been a great resource for me as a hockey coach. His insights into session design around the use of competitive exercises to shape the learning has been awesome to utilize on the ice. He's very active on Twitter and is you're likely to find more information on him at Coach Dan Wright. Dan, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. It's a very detailed intro.
You're welcome. I did my research.
Good stuff. Okay, so I've got a little presentation around how we would look to develop individuals. I've got a few videos to set the scene and stuff, so shall I crack on? Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour of what football looks like, or academy football looks like in the UK. I thought I would just share this quickly with you, David, to show you kind of my journey. Won't go through all that because I won't be able to cover it in time, but just kind of how I've moved through grassroots coaching with young players and adult players, and into kind of school and PE stuff, and then into non-league, and then to where I am now working with the academy system here at Southampton. So that's a little flavour for people that might be interested in that stuff.
In the video we saw, what age group was that, just for reference?
They were under 13s. They're
yeah.
Just moved to 14s. Yes, that was last year's under 13s group. So some nice players in there. So some of this stuff I'm going to talk about is kind of Southampton's message, and some of it is mine, and there's obviously some alignment with that. In terms of the club's strategy, is to maximise the potential of players and staff in a culture of excellence, which is founded on world-class ability and conduct in all disciplines. Okay. And in terms of an academy lens, what that looks like is we're trying to develop players that are able to play in the first team, and to produce a squad that is 50% made up of 50% graduates. So that's quite unusual in the Premier League, which is obviously buying a lot of players from across the globe, but to develop your own players and to get players into the first team is the objective, whether you work in the under 9s or you work in the under 23s. And then, for people that maybe not aware, quite a lot of these successful players that have gone on to achieve really, really big things started their academy journey at Southampton. So Gareth Bale is very topical at the moment, just moved back to Spurs, but he's obviously won a lot with Real Madrid. Luke Shaw, Adam Lallana, Oxlade-Chamberlain, now a European champion, and James Ward-Prowse, who was at the club from under 8, now the club's captain. So it's got quite a history of producing or developing these young players that have gone on to play at the very highest level. This is kind of a nice slide that would work across different sports. So the 3 pillars of our coaching philosophy are faith-specific, player-centered, and holistic. So player-centered means putting the individual at the heart of what we're doing, whether that's session design, reviews, talking to parents, or game time. We're always thinking about what does that individual need. Holistic means that we don't just look at them as athletes. We're thinking about their education, their travel time, maybe their growth and maturation. So we're really understanding all the context around the player. And then phase specific is making sure that what we use in terms of practice or interventions with under 9s would be very different to 14s, which would be very different to first team players. So making sure that the pitch size or the language is really kind of phase specific for the kids we're looking at. So not just taking a drill that we found online and sticking it on a bunch of 9s and saying that this will work because I've seen Guardiola do it. So those kind of 3 pillars you might hear me reference a couple of times, because they're kind of really core and really help you when you're thinking about these things, to think like what really should we be doing, which one of these pillars is it pulling at. And then kind of the depth of staff at the club is huge. So these are all kind of the team of teams that work around the player. So obviously coaching or technical coaching, which is where I would fit in. Then education, we have full-time teachers at the club, but also we interact with the teachers at the players' school. Operations, we've got quite a net of people travelling kind of 2 or 3 hours across the south. So there's lots of buses and trains and all that good stuff that goes with that, with timetables. sports science in terms of strength and conditioning and gym work and on the pitch work, medicine, which has become really important in this kind of COVID area, but also kind of keeping the boys safe and yeah, making sure that they're coming back from injuries or staying injury free, I guess is the main aim. Psychology, which we could touch on it in some of the individual plans. Analysis, so that would be video work that you've just seen in the first bit, and then safeguarding and welfare. So these are all kind of the people or teams around the player, and that all go into kind of helping the player improve ultimately on the pitch.
Who would you have all those individual pieces around the player? Who would manage the connections between them and the communication between all those different divisions at the club?
Yeah, so I suppose big picture, we would have an academy manager that would oversee all of that, but we also have lead age group coaches. So that's my role, to make sure that I've got a picture or an idea of all of this stuff. So I would need to know where that boy lived, what school he went to, names of mums and dads, injury history, what his training timetable looks like. So quite often the boys have different timetables. So in the group that I've got this season, the group that I've just inherited, there's 5 different timetables. So you need to know which kids are going to be on the grass at what time, and which ones to expect, and which ones have travelled 10 minutes and which ones have travelled 2 hours to get there, so that you've got some sort of context around that stuff. But it's not always easy. Like, there's a lot of emails and a lot of conversations, and we try and meet once a week to kind of just discuss the headlines or to talk about the individuals in the group. Sometimes we'll just rattle through every kid and say, what's going on, what's new in his world, or what's the current situation with his injury, or his travel time or whatever. So that is a big part of the role. Like, it's it helps us kind of stay sharp, I guess. And then so once we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the technical coaching, the image on the right is how we kind of break down the academy player. So in the FA here in the UK, they use the 4-corner model. This is something similar, which is 5 pillars. So ball mastery would be kind of the technical ability to deal with the ball. Athleticism would be things like speed and change of direction and having an outstanding physical attribute to play the game. Game intelligence is probably kind of tactical understanding or knowing where you fit in the bigger picture. Enthusiasm and curiosity is what we're using instead of psychology. Psychology is a bit of a scary word for young players, and I'm not sure they know what it means. It's pretty scary for adults, to be fair. So we use enthusiasm and curiosity to talk about the player as a learner. Are they involved in their own learning? Do they ask questions? Do they want to get better? And then game impact is probably the outcome, what we're seeing in matches, and what are the reasons for those good or bad things that are happening in games. So this might be how we would look to start an individual plan with a player, or have a conversation about a player's development. Which one of these pillars is he excelling in, and which ones do we need to maybe put a bit more work in? And then the image on the left is something that I kind of use as a mental model, because I think sport and education in general does break all these things down, because it's easier for us to deal with. So like technical skills or ball mastery, we're really strong with that as coaches, and we're probably quite comfortable to talk about that. An S&C coach might be comfortable with the athleticism, but really the elastic band ball is kind of acknowledging that all of this stuff is intertwined, and you can't have one without the other, and one's wrapped around the other. So the game intelligence and ball mastery, they can't be divorced, really. They're kind of 2 sides of the same coin. So that's an image I like to use a lot to kind of help coaches understand that you can't just be really strong in one of these areas. We've got to get these all wrapped around the player to get it to go right.
From your perspective and from the club's perspective, I guess, because that's where ultimately where it would probably come is, do you put equal weighting into all those 5 categories, or is it a sliding scale depending on the boy and where he may be at throughout this process?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I've actually been tasked at the moment this season with trying to blend this a bit more. So, for example, delivering psychology or enthusiasm and curiosity through small-sided games. So rather than sitting in a classroom to do psych and going to the gym to do athleticism, trying to remove some of these barriers. So similar to the question around kind of all the teams, getting upskilled or using the knowledge of the S&C coaches to design practices that encourage the bits that we need to work on. I think naturally, like as a football coach, I'm probably strongest in ball mastery, game intelligence, and game impact. I think that would be probably the same across sports, but you can get a good steer of psychology from playing the game or coaching the game a lot, and then you go and speak to experts in the club and say, I'm struggling with this player, or not building this connection with this player, and might come up with some strategies that are used on game day or training. So it would really depend on that individual in front of you. I suppose we're probably trying to offer a base level of of quality coaching, but each kid would have different needs. Some are probably naturally quite athletic. Some might have to work on kind of change direction, and there's other bits to get up to speed. Good question. That it's a tough one to answer.
Yeah, definitely.
And then in terms of the academy player, on the left we've got the 10 Commandments, which has been bounced around on social media quite a lot, and I suppose this is a real snapshot of what we expect a Southampton player to look like in terms of a human. So things like being a positive role model and trying to be on time, and knowing that you're an ambassador. So if they're on public transport wearing Southampton branded gear, that we expect them to act in a certain way. So this would be in the classrooms, it would be by the side of the pitch, it's in the canteen. So that we're trying to, and then as staff, we're trying to model this, and we're trying to live it. So it's not just wallpaper; it's something that the kids feel like that is important. And then alongside that, we've got a player characteristics document. So I've put here for a number 9 striker, but using those 5 pillars that we just talked about, we would think about the characteristics that we would expect of that player. So a goalkeeper's one would look completely different to a number 9. But what is the ball mastery for a centre forward? What is the ball mastery for a number 4? And then when players come through the door, or we're identifying or assessing talent, we might use this player characteristic document to say, I think he does do these two things really good. We probably need to work on these 1 or 2 to get him up to speed. So that's, again, a nice framework to kind of to help coach, make sure we're talking about the same thing, rather than just having generic sports chats, which can turn into kind of bar talk, and just he's good at this and good at that. So if we've got some kind of shared language, we can make sure we're looking at the same thing. And then something that is quite important to me is around coaching the person, not just the player. So we talked about understanding all of the stuff that goes on around the player. So recognizing that coaching is a human activity, which has been challenging during this period where it's been a lot of virtual and screens. So missing that kind of FaceTime with the kids and getting, having private chats or laughing and joking on the pitch. But coaching is about relationships. So if we want to stretch or challenge people or set these individual plans, we're going to struggle if we haven't got a relationship. I think the days of just having loads of technical or tactical knowledge and coach is king, I think those days are starting to disappear, and you need to have good relationships with the players and need to feel like they trust you and that you're invested in helping them get better. Linking back to kind of the age appropriate or phase specific stuff, thinking about what journey you're preparing them for. So you wouldn't coach a 9-year-old the same way you'd coach an 18-year-old that's trying to get into the first team, and thinking about where to focus or how hard to push them in certain areas. And then, maybe some bits for coaches to think about when they're like focusing on individuals. Think about their social cultural background. So that might be, heritage in terms of families. It might be what schools they go to, what areas they've lived in. All that good stuff, that the culture that they're operating in. So that's probably even more relevant in your world than it is in mine. But we've got lots of players from London that would be lots of different cultures, lots of different nationalities, and they have different values and different beliefs. So understanding some of that stuff is really rich. Thinking about why kids want to play football and their needs. So, why did they turn up in the first place? What did they fall in love with? So we've all probably coached that player that hates defending or really values scoring and not so interested in the defensive side. So thinking about, what age did they start playing football and what was important to them, and finding a way to show them that defending is important, not ignoring the bit that they love about the sport, because that's why they fell in love with it. And then I suppose tied into that, their football history. So have they been playing football for 2 years, or have they been playing since they were, old enough to kick a ball around with dad? Because all of these things might be quite interesting, because you might see 2 players that are at a similar level, but one of them might have been playing for 10 years, one of them might have been playing for 2. And actually it might be the one with less history that might go on in the future to surpass the others. So making sure we're thinking a bit long-term and not making snap judgments on stuff that's very fluid at these age groups, right? It could really change.
I guess this process for you guys is just ongoing, right? It's constantly evolving and changing for each individual. Like I guess the big thing is that you guys don't want to be, you just said it there, you don't want to be fixed in your viewpoint of any of your individuals. You just kind of, it's constantly evolving and changing and morphing into something new.
Yeah, and I think when you work in these age groups, you kind of learn that maybe the hard way. So you can make, I think most people can see a good player and a bad player at certain age groups, but you know, picking which one's going to be a good one in the future is much harder. Yep. So we have a whole process. I've got a diagram a bit later on that we could touch on, but a process of how we look at games, and then how we look at a block of work, and then how we're kind of assessing potential and performance and separating those two things. So you get the kind of classic early maturers or early born or whatever, players that have got athletic advantages that might be performing really well. And then you've got the ones that maybe will perform well later in the older age groups, and knowing what we're looking at. So is it performance now, but actually potential is quite low? And is it low performance now, but potential might be quite high? And like you said, that's a constant piece of work that, we're always looking to review. So the focus of the conversation today was to talk about kind of individuals. So these are the age groups that I work in, 12 to 14. So we're looking in these age groups about developing an identity. So I think maybe before that, it's kind of developing a skill set and a baseline of technical actions. And then within these age groups, we're kind of getting the player to think about what they're really strong at. So what is your outstanding attribute? And the way that we'd explain this to a player is like, what did you get recruited for? What is it that you do that is better than everybody else? So like a really easy example is maybe Messi's dribbling or Ronaldo's goal scoring or Van Dijk's defending. What is it that makes them outstanding? And do the kids know that? Because quite often they get hit with so much kind of coaching interventions, they forget the one thing they're really good at. What does that look like moving that forward? So if you're a good dribbler, what does it look like to be a Premier League dribbler? And what is it, what is it we're going to have to develop to continue that to be really sharp? Probably near the end of these age groups is, how does that fit into a team? So if you're really good at this one thing, how do you recognize that fits in with other people's game as well? So it's not always about me, but how does my super strength fit into this team? What is your blocker or rate limiter? So what is the thing that's going to stop you progressing in the future? So maybe your weaker foot or your athleticism, what is the thing that we need to make sure we drag up to a certain standard to give you a chance? And then what's the plan? Like, what are we working on in this period of work, or in this 6 months, or in this season, to have a real kind of honed in, zoomed in approach so that the players know what that is, and what it looks like over those matches and training sessions.
It sounds like from your explanation of it, the players are involved in this process. I mean, they're
yeah, for sure. So this is the process kind of on a screen, because quite often I talk about this and people go, oh, this is complicated, or there's a lot of levels to this. So I kind of drew this together so that hopefully it makes a bit of sense. So if we start far left, the first thing I like to do is meet the parents and get to know the families and what we're talking about. So for example, last Friday I drove 4.5 hours to go and meet some parents and have a cup of tea and get to know their backgrounds and get to know what makes them tick. I often meet the parents without the player first. I find that if they meet with the player, you maybe get a watered down version or a less honest version. So tend to meet with the parents on their own first, because you meet the players through the sessions. So then we get to know the people that we're coaching. So which one likes to complain, which one is always going to train really hard, which one's really quiet, which one asks loads of questions. So get to know the people you're coaching, maybe without any judgment. So at the moment we've done no tactical plans, no individual plans. It's just human skills. Then I like to have a period where we just watch them through training and games. So this tends to be pre-season, which is about 6 weeks. Again, been a bit of a strange year, this one, but it tends to be that period. And then we'll start a conversation with the player about what is it you want to get better at, and what is your super strength, or what is the thing that you think you're outstanding at. Throughout that kind of first phase, we'll then get to put that onto paper or onto screen, where we'll have some goals and we'll have an individual development plan or an individual player program. Some people call them different things, different clubs, where, again, I've got some examples of that later on, where the players know, this is what I'm working on, this is how often I'm going to work it, and these are the people involved in that process. And then the red stuff is what this looks like on a weekly basis. This is probably where coaches are really strong. So planning for your week. So if you've got 1 contact, 2 contacts, 3 contacts, whatever you've got with your players, how are you going to design that week? Within the week, we like to have a period where it's completely player-led. So probably only about 30 to 40 minutes, but a real part of the session where the players will lead the practice. That might be individual practice, or we might get them to lead a warm-up. We've then got games, which is a fixture program that's provided by the Premier League, and we also supplement that with some other games. We then would do some video analysis, either in small groups, or we've been using platforms like Huddle electronically and doing kind of conversations like this, either in small groups or individual. And then the players keep match diaries, which again are online, where they can submit what they thought went well around their target or their performance, and then we offer them some feedback, either through the video analysis using Huddle or written through the match diary. And then periodically, so every 6 to 12 weeks, we would sit down with that multidisciplinary team, so that kind of team of teams idea that I spoke about. And we'd sit down and talk about, this is the player's goal, or this is the player's objective. How's he been getting on? Do we want to change it? Do we want to completely change it? Do we want to make it harder? Do we want to change their kind of diet of training and games? The player does a similar process. So the player would focus and reflect on, you know, I was working on my left foot. Do you know what? I haven't done any practice at all, and I don't think it's got better. Or, you know, the complete opposite. They've worked really hard and some things have happened. And then we either have a parent-player review, like a parents' evening, where we sit down and have these conversations. Or every 6 weeks, we also have a player-led one where we'd sit down and the player would feedback and we would just kind of listen and, maybe I'll add a couple of pointers. And then the last kind of block of this work is right at the bottom. Twice a year, we have an all where all of those people from all of those team of teams sit down and talk about what we're seeing with the players. And then we try to grade them on performance and potential. So we kind of give them 2 markers rather than just the 1. Similar to most education systems, kind of how they're getting on with the work and what do we think they've got the potential to do. So that's quite a wordy, heavy slide, but that's kind of what the process looks like from start to finish. And then just
in terms of one quick question, in terms of reporting, you know, is there an ongoing process? You have the diaries, but in terms of the parent interaction, like, they're involved in a review, but is there a reporting process? Like, do you provide, you know, written reports or written reviews, or is it just, you know, you're doing it?
So these match diaries here would be public for the parents to see.
Yep.
I say public, like online. So players and parents would be able to see those. Obviously, the 6-week review is a chance for the parent to kind of sit down and ask some questions. But I suppose in this first step where we've met the parents and we understand kind of their drivers, or, you know, they're those parents that are going to want to know everything about everything. Are they ones that are going to let the coach coach? Are they somewhere in between? I'm quite happy to speak to parents. So I try to avoid text and email, and I'll do everything either face-to-face or on the phone, because I think things can get misconstrued, but, you know, when they're written. So I'm quite happy to talk to parents in and around this, and the old classic kind of in the car park conversations are pretty powerful. But I think it's maybe a whole separate webinar, but like we've got to involve the parents, because I think when you cut them out is when bad things happen. So if we're really trying to develop these players and push and stretch them, we need the parents' support, because there's going to be times where the kids are feeling like it's hard work or too much, or, you know, the coach is on my back, and the parents, we need them there to kind of back us up, and they need to understand this IDP, this goal, so they can feed into it, rather than having no idea and maybe giving the kids a mixed message, because that can get confusing. And then again, just for context, really, this is what a sample week would look like for this kind of age group. So an evening training on a Tuesday. Wednesday, we would take them out of school. So the kids would travel to the club where they do a bit of education, a bit of on-pitch sports science and conditioning, then a training session, then lunch, and then in the afternoon we have a gym session, so that's not on the pitch, individual practice session led by the players, a video analysis session, and a psychology session. But like I said, I've been tasked with kind of blending this into practice. Thursday night would be similar to Tuesday night, so it would be maybe an S&C session, some individual analysis, because this tends to be team on a Wednesday. Then another training session. Friday is a games-based night, so we do like a mixed age group and change the format or change the kind of feeling of the night. Saturdays they have off, and then Sundays would be fixtures home and away. So that's kind of what these boys are committing to in these age groups. And then onto individual development plans. So this document is one we used last year. It's been a little bit touched up this year. So everybody would have one of these, and they're on PowerPoint. So to start, there's a little bit kind of around my journey and you know, why the players are doing it. And then we've got kind of a performance passport where the players are talking about brothers and sisters, where they live, how long they've been playing football, what motivates them, what kind of coaching they like, what kind of coaching they hate, some stuff about their positions, maybe their football journey today. And then we co-create these kind of 3 goals. Again, different conversations might be that some kids only need 1 or 2, depending on, you know, maybe their cognitive ability or how good they are. You don't want to overload these kids with too many targets, so some of them have just got 1 or 2. And then we break down this performance goal into what it actually looks like and then who's involved. So it's quite small, but you can see kind of how and who and when. So for example, if it was, if this is yours, I want to improve on my change of direction. When you're going to do that, I'm going to do that Tuesday evenings, and I'm going to do it Wednesday in the gym. Okay, who will be involved? Well, it'll be the sports scientist, who's Tom. It'll be Dan and the co-coach on the training sessions, and I need some practices to practice at home. And then every 6 weeks, we kind of bring this document up and go, how are you getting on with this? And like I put this line here, the journey is in your hands. So I think initially the kids think a lot that they will just turn up and the coach will do something, and then at the end they'll be a Premier League player. So this is kind of the first step of explaining that there's lots of work and they're going to have to do a lot of it. And this document is kind of the first step of keeping these guys accountable. So here are some like overviews of these documents. So this is like a 1-page, yes, this is a double-sided document that I'd have on the side of the pitch, which is laminated, so that when we're doing a practice, even if it's a small-sided game or a training game, I can think about what this player's got on his individual plan or his individual player program, and think about how I can link my coaching intervention to that player. So the green is the super strength, so 1v1 defending for this defender here, and the white is things they're working on. So most of these kids have got 3 targets. And then, you know, if you're doing maybe a 1v1 practice, we've got people working on defending 1v1s, we've got people working on dribbling here, for example, or reaction to mistakes might come out in a 1v1. So then as we're going through the session, we'll have pre-planned this, but as we're going through the session as well, just maybe reflecting on, Ben had this on his target, so he does react poorly to mistakes. Do I intervene? Do I just raise his awareness of that's what's going on? But this would be pitch side every time we were kind of training or playing games. And then it's all well and good having like a pretty PowerPoint, but here's some real life examples of what's going on. So in the player-led reviews that I mentioned, this is Jaden. He's feeding back his player-led review, so it's not something that I will kind of take control over. He will stand in front of me and normally a couple of other members of staff and get the laptop out and present back and say, this is what I've been working on. I feel like I've done this well. Some of the more active kids are getting video clips to support what they've done. So if I'm working on passing to break lines, they might ask the analysis team to build some examples of them doing it well against the Chelsea or an Arsenal and say, look, here's some examples of me doing it. The middle two kind of pictures here, we've got individual targets on a game day. So here the players have written what their targets are. This is an away game, so we just stuck a piece of paper on the wall and the kids have scribbled what they're working on today, so what they're focusing on. And then they give themselves a tick after the game if they think they've done it. And this one lad's put an S for sometimes. So that they picked their area of focus and then they've graded themselves. And then a slightly different version is a unit. So this is the midfielders working on line breaking passes. And they designed or chose all of these things that they thought were important on a game day. And then we'll use that either post-game, but probably more likely I've taken a photo of it so that we can build a debrief on Wednesday to say, you guys said these are things are important. How do you think you got on with creative combinations they picked? This big picture is the lads designing their own practice. So they're working in pairs before we go out. They've got just pen and paper and they're scribbling some ideas. We've put them in those pairs because they're kids that will have similar targets or targets that would have synergy. So someone working on crossing, someone working on finishing. And then bottom left here is their online match diary where they'll be typing and sharing their thoughts. And then this big stop, start, continue was a session that I held with them around things that they liked and disliked about the program. So we've got games and day release and tours and tournaments, and those guys are deciding, not deciding, but adding their feedback to what they think about that. And then, another lad here presenting his developments so far. So that's some real life examples of the kids living this stuff.
From your experience, when you take the boys through this process, do you get a sense of good, self-reflection? Like, is obviously it would depend on age, depends on the individual, but in general, do you feel you get good buy-in from the boys, and if you do, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some conversation around what age group to start this. So this kind of level of detail starts about under 12. I think before that, we're maybe using just the super strength. I don't know how aware the kids are below that. That's kind of not my area of expertise, but this group, I would say, are pretty self-aware. And the constant kind of check-in, whether they're doing it for themselves or they're showing the coach, I think has really helped. And then using the video is really powerful, because you'll get some kids that are, really optimistic and think they've played well all the time, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like they're quite sure they're a good player. And then when you check all the clips, they're maybe struggling to find the things that they think they do well, which is coaching done. Like, I don't need to say anything when they say, "Oh, I'm really good at this thing." And you go, "Can you find me 3 clips of you doing it well in a match?" And then they come back and go, "No, I can't." And I go, "Okay." Like, we don't need the old school kind of intervention, because it's what the game is telling you, that you're not doing it as much as you think you are. But yeah, there's probably some levels of reflection. There's 1 or 2 that I think are naturally more comfortable with it than others, and some of them might use it a bit as a shield to think they're doing well all the time. But yeah, it's an interesting process. I think when you coach kids, I often like to think, what are they thinking? Like, if you know what the players are thinking, then you've got an idea of where to take the practice or where to take your intervention. And when you don't know what they're thinking, you can get that really wrong. So if you're jumping in with I can help you here and I can fix it, and that's absolutely what they hate, or they really want loads of support and you're, putting them in a tough situation and they're drowning, then you don't know when to step in and when to offer that kind of balance of challenge and support. This process, I think you get a real feel for personalities, and you go, I think I can leave that kid to struggle for a couple more sessions and he might work it out, or actually Billy's really, really drowning at the moment and I need to help him with some intervention, whether that's on the pitch or just with a little one-to-one chat. But you get that feel through this.
I find process. Sometimes with processes like this too, it's the process itself is valuable. Like, the content is obviously important, but going through that process is valuable onto itself, because it will draw other things out of it.
Yeah, if you have any kind of questions to go around that.
Yeah, I think one that comes to mind, I mean, in our environment here at our school, kids are playing, in seasons of sport and different kind of teams throughout a school year. And I guess one of the questions I would think about is, in the multi-sport environment, like, for a coach, and I use this term, should the focus maybe shift in this environment, or I'd like to hear your opinion, from the hard skills involved with a sport. So, individual, let's say you use the football context, in terms of the football skills involved with becoming a good footballer, to maybe some of the softer ones in terms of like game intelligence and the way they think. And because the boys, he may play football in our first term, and then in our winter term plays basketball. Like, just trying to think about how our coaches can help that boy as he moves through multi-sport environment. Do you have any thoughts on how, coaches from different seasons could kind of build the development plan where the boy is essentially at the center, but he moves through different activities? How could you account for that, do you think?
It's a nice question. You put me on the spot there.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I think like in my context, it's we've maybe got the opposite problem. So we probably play too much football. It's turning into like an 11 and a half month season. So we're always like trying to supplement the program with multi-sports. So we would do rugby, American football, hockey, volleyball, kabaddi. rock climbing, all of these things we've done in Southampton time, because the kids are so kind of engulfed and wrapped up in football that we almost have to go, there's this other stuff as well. So we're really keen for them to do that, and we push for them to do school football as well. I think the question maybe in your environment would be thinking about what is the kind of, or what are the golden threads that would run through all of those things. So using kind of the 5 pillars that we would have, that enthusiasm and curiosity would work for every sport, right? Like, so always being the hardest working player, like that is something that we talk about a lot. If we've got somebody that we think is really high on the technical or potential level but doesn't work that hard, that might be something we put on their plan. Can somebody who's watching the game or watching practice say David was the hardest working player? And that would be the same if you were on the ice or if you're on the turf or whatever, right? Like that would be something. And then there's got to be a benefit of the athleticism pillar. There's got to be like having all these tastes of different sports. It's got to supplement each other. And I'm not a sports scientist, but there's the idea of like donor sports. So sports that you could play that would lead you to other sports, which is some of the challenges we get because the kids come in so early and they only do football. They never get this variety. So we have to kind of add this variety. And older coaches would go, I remember when we climbed trees and we played cricket and we do all these other things. So we're trying to think about what are the sports, whether they're coming from a movement base or whether, like you said, a tactical kind of game intelligence base that would help the players play both. And I suppose football is quite fortunate because it's an invasion game. There's quite a lot of transfer to, to basketball, to netball, to hockey, to anything that's got goals or end zones. So that's pretty cool. So we would probably try and do that through Multisport and get the, when I'm saying on pitch S&C in that timetable, that's what that would look like. So we would play American football to work on kind of change of direction or speed. So someone's launching the ball over the top. Your knowledge of American football will be a lot better than mine. The ball over the top and that change of direction to run, catch it, and land in the end zone.
I believe it's called a post route. I think
there you go. It's just a run in my world.
Exactly.
But we'll make the pitches quite big so the kids have to experience that, top speed and cover good distances and stuff like that. So that comes back to that teams of teams idea. And when we're having that conversation as staff, we'll go, what does David need? Well, David needs practices where he's going to change direction. He's going to run a lot. Okay, well, we can design that in S&C like this. We could design it in football like this. And maybe your question is like, well, we could also design it in basketball like this, or we could design it in, so that then you're completing like this athlete, like this whole rounded person, an athlete, rather than just a really good football player or a really good basketball player or whatever. That would be my quick answer, but I maybe need to give some more.
No.
And the reflection process is again like a skill that works for life, right? It's not football specific. If you had a document that was more multi-sport based and the one we've just kind of re-edited or reshaped for this current season has got more education in it, because the schools are saying when we ask them to do something, it goes okay. When the club asks them to do something, they do it perfectly. So by putting more education stuff in there, the kids are like, oh, Dan's interested in my education. I should probably do that English homework. So, but making everything, it kind of helps that individual in front of you a bit more. But that would be an interesting project to unpick, I think.
And I guess the last question I would have, the enthusiasm, I know that's one of the pillars, but the enthusiasm for this process, like are the players, do you find a correlation between their enthusiasm and their willingness to engage in this process and their success overall, so like the outcome at the end of the day, if they're a first team player, or, I mean, you've been there 5 years, so you probably have some of your U13s that are pushing right now to be in the first team, or may be there. So do you see a correlation between their enthusiasm, their willingness, their self-awareness, and how they're part of that process and their ultimate outcome or success at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think a coach is always going to say yes, because that's like justifying why we have a job. What I would say to coaches is that will have many different faces. So there might be someone that builds the all singing and all dancing PowerPoint with video clips, and that's one way. But there might also be someone that just wants to have conversations with you all the time. Like practice finishes and they want to talk about this thing, or the game finishes and they want to talk about that one moment that they didn't understand or they didn't quite get right. That is still reflection, and that is still someone who's invested and curious in their development. So maybe don't get too, bedazzled by, we've got this one development plan that looks brilliant and this conversation looks brilliant. and 80% of the group do it perfectly. There might be one or two that rebel because of the teenagers, and then there might be 3 or 4 that are like, they're interested, but I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it with video. And I want to show you. So there's that clip, the last clip, we were filming the kids doing their individual practice. So then just think about, similar to why the kids start playing the game, think about that driver that they're really interested in, and can we harness that power? So if it's video or conversations, or the other one that's quite common at this age group is like icons and role models. So can you find me Pogba doing this? Can you find me Ronaldo doing that? That is still someone that's interested in their journey. So I would say yes, but make sure you know what that looks like. It might not look exactly what you want it to look like. And coaches, or the coaches I know, are quite OCD and quite like, they love a prep and they love stationery and they love it to look a certain way, and it might look a different way. But don't kind of ignore those players. Make sure you find the way to kind of harness the fact that they are interested in getting better.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time, Dan, today in your busy schedule, and with the startup of a new season, which is probably unlike any that you've been a part of in the past, or probably hope to be not involved in a season like this again. But really appreciate the insight into build and development for individual players, and thanks very much.
No worries. And if anybody's kind of watched it or listened to it and got any questions, please get in touch. I'm happy to be critiqued and to explain some of it. And yeah, that's going to make me better. So yeah, don't be shy. I'm happy to have those interactions.
All the best. Thanks very much.
Thank you.